Part 1. The Displaced Armada. The skis above the ocean planet of Lantia did not merely open, they shattered. For the expedition team inhabiting the ancient city of Atlantis, 3 months of constant, nerve-wracking survival had instilled a hypervigilance that immediately registered the dimensional tearing. Alarms screamed through the control room as Dr. Rodney McKay dropped his coffee, his hands flying across the crystalline consoles. The city's sensors were feeding him impossible data. A localized temporal spatial fissure of terrifying magnitude had erupted in the high orbit of the planet, vomiting forth an armada of displaced vessels before violently sealing itself shut with a shockwave that rattled the very spires of the floating city. Major John Shepard sprinted into the command center, P-90 submachine gun tight against his chest, finding Dr. Elizabeth Weir already staring at the main holographic projection in stunned silence. Hovering in the space above them was an impossibly eclectic fleet. There was a massive, wedge-shaped warship painted with red stripes, flanked by an array of 5 distinct saucer-end nacelle configurations spanning centuries of a unified design lineage. Floating near them was what appeared to be an ancient Earth maritime battleship retrofitted for the cosmos, a small, angular freighter, and a tiny, cross-winged single-seat fighter. Panic was the immediate instinct, but the silence on the comms was quickly broken by a chorus of hails, all broadcasting on standard, unencrypted radio and subspace frequencies. Cooler heads prevailed. Aboard the various vessels, a rapid realization dawned as science officers from Spock to Data, from T'Pol to the astromech R2-D2, analyzed the closing of the anomaly. The chronoton decay and the sheer localized entropy of the rift's collapse offered an undeniable, inescapable mathematical truth. There was no going back. The doors to their respective universes had been atomized. They were stranded. Recognizing the heavily shielded, magnificent floating city below as the only point of civilization, the fleet commanders agreed to a peaceful cessation of alert statuses. The wedge-shaped warship, identified as the Venator-class Star Destroyer Resolute, held its fighter squadrons. The 5 iterations of the starship Enterprise lowered their defensive shields. The space battleship Yamato powered down its devastating wave motion gun. The freighter Ghost and the X-Wing assumed holding patterns. Through a monumental effort of cross-platform communication established by McKay and his new counterparts in orbit, the leaders of this displaced armada materialized, shuttled, and transported down into the massive central conference chamber of Atlantis. The room was immediately crowded, a surreal tapestry of uniforms, armor, and robes. Elizabeth Weir stood at the head of the long table, flanked by Shepard, McKay, and Taylor Emagan. To her right sat the Starfleet contingent, a living museum of Starfleet history. Captain Jonathan Archer of the NX-01 looked hardened, carrying the fresh scars of the Xindi conflict. Beside him sat Captain James T. Kirk, radiating a quiet, confident authority, with his Vulcan first officer, Spock, standing silently behind his chair. Captain Rachel Garrett of the Enterprise C sat with perfect posture, her tactical mind already assessing the room. But the focal point of the Starfleet delegation was the 2 men seated beside her, identical in visage but separated by decades of unseen, harrowing experiences. Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Enterprise D looked at the older, battle-hardened Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Enterprise E with a mixture of profound fascination and deep, philosophical dread. Across the table sat the contingent from a galaxy far, far away. General Anakin Skywalker and General Obi-Wan Kenobi, clad in their Jedi armor, sat beside a young, eager Ahsoka Tano and the stoic clone Captain Rex. Further down sat Luke Skywalker, wearing his bright orange flight suit, his eyes continuously drifting toward Anakin with an unreadable, turbulent emotion. Next to Luke were Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus of the Ghost, representing a rebellion that half the table had never heard of, against an empire that the other half had not yet lived to see. Completing the circle was Suzumu Kodai of the Yamato, his uniform crisp, his eyes reflecting the deep exhaustion of a crew that had just saved their Earth from radioactive death, only to be cast into the unknown. Weir initiated the proceedings, her voice calm and mediating, welcoming them to Atlantis and confirming what their science officers had already deduced. They were in the Pegasus galaxy, entirely cut off from Earth, and the dimensional rift was permanently closed. Acceptance settled over the room like a heavy shroud. There was no time for denial. They were military leaders, explorers, and survivors. A consensus was quickly reached. To survive together, they needed to understand exactly who they were dealing with. The sharing of histories began, an incredible unraveling of timelines that defied logic. Archer spoke of the birth of the coalition of planets and the devastating attack on Earth by the Xindi. Kirk detailed the expansion of the United Federation of Planets, the Klingon Cold War, and the Romulan Neutral Zone. Garrett filled the gaps of the mid-24th century, leaving her timeline just before a fateful battle at Narendra III. Then the floor yielded to the two Picards. The younger Picard, commanding the Galaxy-class Enterprise D, explained his ship's mission of exploration, nodding that his timeline was relatively peaceful, though tensions with the Romulans were rising. The older Picard from the Sovereign-class Enterprise let out a heavy, solemn sigh. Since the Temporal Prime Directive was effectively rendered moot by their permanent exile in a new reality, the older Picard chose candor. He looked his younger self in the eyes and detailed the nightmares that awaited the Federation. He spoke of the Borg, a cybernetic race of conquerors. He revealed that in exactly 1 month, a being named Q would fling the Enterprise D into the Delta Quadrant, resulting in their first, terrifying encounter with the Borg cube. He spoke of the Battle of Wolf 359, the devastation of the fleet, and his own traumatic assimilation into Locutus. The younger Picard sat in stunned, absolute silence, the weight of a future he would now never experience pressing down on his shoulders. The older Picard did not stop there. He detailed the Dominion War, the immense loss of life, and the eventual uneasy peace. The Starfleet officers absorbed the tactical data, their paradigms shifting as they realized the sheer scale of the conflicts the older Picard had survived. The Jedi and the Rebels took the floor next. Anakin and Obi-Wan spoke of the Clone Wars, the Separatist threat, and the Republic's fight for democracy. As they spoke of the Jedi Order's nobility, Kanan Jarrus and Hera Syndulla exchanged a dark, sorrowful look. Kanan, recognizing that they were permanently displaced, revealed the truth of his timeline. He told them of Order 66, the betrayal of the clones, the extermination of the Jedi Order, and the rise of the Galactic Empire under the Sith. Anakin recoiled, his anger flashing, demanding to know how such a thing was possible. Kanan could not provide the exact details of Anakin's specific fate, only that the Jedi fell. It was Luke who spoke next, his voice quiet but carrying the resonance of the Force. He introduced himself as the son of Anakin Skywalker, revealing that in his timeline just 2 months prior, he had destroyed the Empire's greatest weapon, the Death Star. Anakin stared at the young man, the realization washing over him that this boy was his son, raised in a dark future without him. The familial revelation was deeply emotional, but the grim reality of the Empire's reign united the Star Wars contingent. Despite the paradoxes and the heartbreaks of their respective histories, they recognized they were now a unified force. Kodai spoke last, his tale of the Yamato bringing a different kind of solemnity to the room. He spoke of an Earth bombarded by radioactive meteors, driven underground, and a desperate, year-long voyage across the cosmos to the planet Iskandar to retrieve a device to cleanse their home. His crew had fought the Gamila's Empire step for step, utilizing the devastating wave motion engine to survive. They had succeeded, their mission was complete, only for the universe to snatch their victory away and drop them here. With the secrets of their pasts laid bare and the air cleared of any underlying temporal fictions, the focus shifted to the agonizing present. Elizabeth Weir and John Shepard took their turns, painting a grim picture of the Pegasus Galaxy. They explained the legacy of the ancients, the original builders of Atlantis, and their ultimate defeat at the hands of the Wraith. Shepard detailed the horrifying nature of the enemy, a telepathic, hive-based species that fed on human life force. He explained the culling, the vast cyclical harvesting of human worlds. And then, with a heavy heart, Shepard admitted the expedition's greatest mistake. Upon their arrival 3 months ago, they had inadvertently awakened the entire Wraith species prematurely from their hibernation. The Pegasus Galaxy was now a hunting ground, and the Wraith were actively searching for Atlantis, hungry and angered. The tactical display in the center of the table lit up, projecting a terrifying map of the Pegasus Galaxy, dotted with thousands of known Wraith Hive ships. Captain Rex, analyzing the holographic spread, leaned forward, his clone trooper conditioning kicking in. He stated bluntly that a direct, conventional war was impossible. Even with the Resolute, the 5 Enterprises, the Yamato, and the ancient drones of Atlantis, they were vastly outnumbered. A frontal assault would draw the entire Hive network down upon them in a swarm that would eventually break their shields and drain their power reserves. The older Picard agreed, drawing on his experience from the Dominion War and fighting the Borg. Survival required a slow, deliberate guerrilla warfare strategy. They needed to bleed the Wraith, strike at their supply lines, destroy their cloning facilities, and disrupt their hive mind communications without revealing the true extent of their combined forces. The first phase of the plan was concealment. The massive fleet in orbit was a beacon to any passing Wraith scout. The Resolute and the Yamato were ordered to land in the deep, sensor-dampening oceans of Lantia, submerging themselves to hide their immense energy signatures. The 5 Enterprises were coordinated by Spock, Data, and McKay to link their deflector arrays, creating a localized, multiphasic cloaking field powered by a combination of Federation warp cores and an ancient zero-point module tapped from the city's reserves, hiding them in the upper atmosphere. With the heavy hitters concealed, they needed a scalpel to scout the galaxy, find new allies among the human populations, and map the Wraith movements. The Ghost was chosen for the task. The Corellian freighter was small, maneuverable, and already designed for stealth operations against an overwhelming empire. However, it was about to receive the greatest refit in the history of the multiverse. In the sprawling underground jumper bays of Atlantis, a joint engineering miracle occurred. Geordi LaForge, Montgomery Scott, Charles Trip Tucker, and Rodney McKay descended upon the freighter alongside Hera and Sabine Wren. They reinforced the ship's hull with titanium alloy plating, beamed down from the Enterprise. LaForge integrated Starfleet metaphasic shielding into the Ghost's deflector grid, making it impervious to standard Wraith energy weapons. McKay managed to adapt a salvaged Lantian cloaking generator, successfully syncing it with the ship's hyperdrive. Finally, engineers from the Yamato installed a localized tachyon sensor suite, allowing the Ghost to detect the unique subspace wakes of Wraith Hive ships from parsecs away without emitting an active ping. Hera Syndulla ran her hands over the new, glowing consoles of her ship, feeling the immense, humming power vibrating through the deck plates. The Ghost was no longer just a rebel smuggler ship. It was an apex predator of the spaceways. As Hera, Kanan, and Sabine prepared to launch the newly refitted Ghost to begin their deep space reconnaissance, the ground strategy was set into motion. The Stargate in the central control room spun to life, its chevrons locking with a thunderous boom. The event horizon stabilized into a shimmering puddle of blue light. Major Shepard stood at the base of the ramp, his P-90 ready, joined by Tala, Ron on Dex, and Dr. Rodney McKay. They were not alone. Flanking AR-1 was the most formidable combat team the Pegasus Galaxy had ever seen. Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi stood with their lightsabers clipped to their belts, the hum of the Stargate reflecting in their eyes. Beside them stood Ahsoka Tano and Kanan Jarrus. Luke Skywalker, carrying his father's original lightsaber, checked his power packs, receiving an encouraging nod from Captain Rex, who had opted for a hybrid loadout of Republic DC-17 blasters and a Lantean stunner. They were tasked with stepping through the gate to off-world human settlements, seeking alliances, uncovering ancient outposts, and laying the groundwork for the resistance. They were to operate in absolute secrecy, leaving no trace of lightsaber burns or phaser signatures that the Wraith could track back to an advanced civilization. As Elizabeth Weir watched from the balcony, she nodded to Shepard. The combined Stargate team stepped through the event horizon, vanishing into the wormhole, ready to bring a new kind of war to the Wraith. Part 2, Cross-Draining and Tactics. The ancient firing range was located deep within the lower, heavily shielded tiers of Atlantis. Originally designed for Lantean kinetic and energy weapon testing millennia ago, the vast, cavernous hall was lined with energy-absorbing metallic alloys that glowed a faint, ambient blue. Today, the pristine silence of the ancient architecture was being violently shattered by a cacophony of sound that defied all logic. The sharp, concussive staccato of Earth-made kinetic firearms competed with the ozone-crackling whine of Republic-era plasma blasters. Major John Shepard stood behind a waist-high barricade of ancient composite material, his arms crossed over his tactical vest, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Beside him, Captain Rex of the 501st Legion stood in his scuffed, white and blue plastered armor, his bucket helmet resting on the console in front of him. They were the orchestrators of this cross-training exercise, a necessary crucible born from the tactical realities of their permanent exile in the Pegasus Galaxy. If they were to wage a shadow war against the Wraith, every member of this displaced coalition needed to be intimately familiar with the armory. Laid out on the long, floating metallic tables before them were dozens of FNP-90 submachine guns, blocks of 5.7mm armor-piercing ammunition, and several crates of heavy DC-15A blaster rifles, DC-15S carbines, and dual DC-17 hand blasters. The principle is primitive, but the application is mathematically sound, I suppose, Dr. Rodney McKay muttered, packing nervously behind the firing line. He gestured vaguely toward the P-90s, controlled chemical explosions propelling shaped metal slugs down a rifled tube. It's barbaric compared to a variable-yield ancient drone or a Federation phaser, but against Wraith organic armor, the kinetic transfer and the armor-piercing core of the bullet do possess a certain brutal efficiency. It's not barbaric, Rodney, it's reliable, Shepard corrected, picking up a P-90 and slapping a translucent 50-round magazine onto the top of the weapon. He pulled the charging handle back with a sharp clack. It doesn't rely on a magnetic containment field that can be disrupted by a Wraith stunner blast. It works in the mud, it works in the rain, and it puts a lot of lead downrange very quickly. Shepard stepped up to the firing line, raised the compact, bullpup weapon to his shoulder and squeezed the trigger. The gun roared, spitting a torrent of brass casings downward as a tight grouping of holes appeared in the center mass of the holographic Wraith target 50 yards downrange. He lowered the weapon, thumbing the safety on. Who's first? Anakin Skywalker stepped forward, his dark Jedi robe swishing around his boots. He eyed the weapon with a mixture of mechanical curiosity and aristocratic disdain. Beside him, Obi-Wan Kenobi sighed, stroking his auburn beard, his expression one of polite suffering. A slug-thrower, Anakin said, picking up the P-90. He turned it over in his mechanized right hand, his eyes scanning the polymer frame, the top-mounted magazine, and the thumbhole grip. We have these on Tatooine and in the Outer Rim, mostly used by bounty hunters or scavengers who can't afford to ban a gas. They're heavy, they rely on finite ammunition, and they jam. This one doesn't jam often, Shepard said, handing Anakin a fresh magazine. And you'll find the fire rate is significantly higher than a standard Tusken Cycler rifle. Give it a try. Seat the magazine on top, slap it down until it clicks, pull the charging handle. Anakin followed the instructions flawlessly, his mechanical aptitude making the physical manipulation of the weapon intuitive. He squared his stance, brought the optical sight to his eye, and fired. The immediate, violent recoil surprised him. Unlike a blaster, which expelled plasma with virtually zero kinetic kickback, the P-90 drove backward into his shoulder with every shot. Anakin's first burst climbed up and to the right, striking the holographic target in the shoulder and neck. He stopped, frowning, his eyes narrowing. He shifted his weight, leaning into the weapon, and reached out with the force. He didn't use it to guide the bullets, that felt like cheating, but he used it to anchor his own body, absorbing the kinetic shockwave into his stance. He squeezed the trigger again, emptying the rest of the 50-round magazine in a single, sustained burst. This time, the weapon remained perfectly level, tearing a single, jagged hole through the center of the target's chest. "Impressive," Rex noted, nodding appreciatively. "High rate of fire, decent armor penetration. The physical impact alone would stagger a commando droid, or a wraith from what you've told us." "It lacks elegance," Obi-Wan said, stepping up reluctantly as Anakin handed the weapon over. "So uncivilized. The noise alone is a tactical disadvantage. A lightsaber hums, it doesn't deafen the user." "With all due respect, General," Rex said, "elegance doesn't always put the enemy in the dirt. We can't use lightsabers for everything, especially if we're trying to hide the fact that there are Jedi in this galaxy." Obi-Wan sighed, accepting the P-90. He didn't bother looking through the optical sight. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the precise location of the target downrange, feeling the mechanical tension of the springs within the gun, and the chemical potential of the gunpowder. He raised the weapon, fired a single, 3-round burst, and immediately placed the gun back on the table. 3 holes appeared dead center in the target's forehead. "Adequate," Obi-Wan conceded, brushing a speck of carbon scoring from his robes. "But I shall stick to my lightsaber unless the situation demands otherwise." "Show off," Ahsoka Tano muttered, stepping up next with a bright grin. The Togruta Padawan picked up 2 P-90s, weighing them in her hands. "Major Shepard, is it possible to dual-wield these?" Shepard blinked. "Well, they eject downward so the brass won't hit you in the face, but the recoil—" Ahsoka didn't wait for him to finish. She dropped into a low, wide stance, crossing her arms and pointing the 2 P-90s at 2 separate targets. She unleashed a hail of gunfire. The recoil was intense, pushing her backward, but her naturally enhanced agility and Togruta strength allowed her to ride the kinetic wave, pivoting her hips to spray both targets. It wasn't as accurate as Anakin or Obi-Wan's attempts, but the sheer volume of fire was devastating. She spun the weapons down, laughing as the smoke cleared. "Loud, very loud, but I like the weight of them." Further down the line, Kanan Jarrus was carefully instructing his young Padawan, Ezra Bridger. Ezra was vibrating with excitement, treating the P-90 like a prized artifact. "Focus, Ezra," Kanan instructed, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "A blaster bolt travels at a constant velocity. These metal slugs, they are affected by gravity. Over long distances, they will drop. You have to account for the arc, the wind, the physical resistance of the air. It's not just pointing and shooting, it's a calculation." Right, calculation," Ezra said, barely listening. He shouldered the weapon and pulled the trigger, hooting excitedly as the gun roared. His aim was erratic, spraying the target's extremities and the wall behind it. Kanan pressed down on the barrel, forcing Ezra to stop. "Breathe. Feel the weapon. It's a tool, not a toy. The Wraith won't stand still for you." Luke Skywalker watched the exchange quietly. The young farm boy from Tatooine felt slightly out of place among these seasoned generals and Clone War veterans. He picked up a P-90 with quiet reverence. It felt heavier than his old hunting rifle back home, more dense. He looked down the sight. He remembered shooting womp rats in Beggar's Canyon. It wasn't about the weapon, it was about the connection to the target. He didn't use the force, not consciously. He just looked downrange, breathed out, and squeezed the trigger. The burst was tight, controlled, and directly on target. Shepard walked over, clapping Luke on the back. "Not bad, kid. You've handled a rifle before." "A bit," Luke said modestly, setting the gun down. "Mostly just pneumatic rifles and old cyclers. This is. It has a lot of power. I can see why you use it." "All right, that's enough primitive ballistics for one morning," Captain James T. Kirk announced, stepping forward with that characteristic swagger. He was wearing his gold command tunic, his phaser holstered at his hip. "Let's see what the Republic considers standard issue." Rex grinned beneath his helmet, though no one could see it. He stepped forward and cracked open a heavy Durasteel crate. The distinctive hum of high-yield power cells filling magnetic containment fields filled the air. He pulled out a DC-15S blaster carbine, tossing it to Major Shepard, and then pulled out a pair of DC-17 hand blasters. "The DC series," Rex announced, his voice taking on the cadence of a drill instructor. "Standard issue for the Grand Army of the Republic. They fire cohesive bursts of plasma gas, specifically Tabana. They are extremely lethal, have virtually zero recoil, and the ammunition capacity of a standard power pack makes your 50-round magazines look like a joke." Kirk picked up one of the DC-17 hand blasters. It was blocky, heavy, and lacked the sleek, ergonomic curvature of a Starfleet Type 2 hand phaser. He looked for a setting dial. "Where's the stun setting, or the wide-beam dispersal?" "Stun is a secondary function, engaged by toggling the power output here," Rex said, pointing to a rigid switch above the trigger guard. "But there is no wide-beam, and there is no disintegrate. These weapons are designed to punch holes in battle droids and armor. They are instruments of war, Captain." Kirk flipped the weapon in his hand, testing its balance, and then abruptly spun it by the trigger guard, snapping it into his hip holster with a cowboy's practiced ease. "It's a hammer. I prefer a scalpel, but I suppose when you're facing a swarm of telepathic vampires, a hammer is precisely what's required." Spock stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. He leaned over the open crate, his sharp Vulcan eyes analyzing the design of a heavy DC-15A rifle. "Fascinating. The utilization of a magnetic bottle to compress and project ionized gas is highly efficient for localized, short to medium-range engagements. However, the energy bloom upon impact must result in a significant loss of kinetic penetration compared to a directed Nadian particle beam." "Nadian particles," McKay scoffed, walking over and adjusting his vest. "Please. Phasers are fine for knocking out a ship's shields, but the energy-to-matter conversion rate is wildly inconsistent depending on atmospheric conditions. Republic blasters, on the other hand, use physical gas. The thermal shock upon impact against Wraith armor would be catastrophic. The armor wouldn't just be pierced, it would flash-boil the organic matter underneath." Spock arched an eyebrow. "Dr. McKay, while your gruesome assessment of the biological trauma is likely accurate, you fail to account for the magnetic interference of a Wraith ship's interior corridors. A phaser's frequency can be modulated. Can this blaster be modulated to penetrate adaptive shielding?" "It doesn't need to be modulated," Rex interrupted, his tone flat. "It just needs to be fired repeatedly until the shield breaks. Volume of fire over frequency manipulation." Captain Jonathan Archer, watching the debate, let out a slow breath. He walked forward, rolling up the sleeves of his blue Starfleet jumpsuit. He picked up a DC-15S carbine. It felt heavier than the MACO phase rifles he had relied on during the grueling expanse of the Xindi mission, but it carried a similar, utilitarian weight. There was no pretense of exploration in this weapon. It was built for killing. "Let's test the hammer," Archer said quietly. He raised the carbine, sighted down the electronic scope, and pulled the trigger. The sound was iconic, a sharp, aggressive crack and thump as a bolt of brilliant blue plasma erupted from the barrel. It slammed into the holographic target, detonating with a shower of digital sparks and a loud hiss. Archer fired again and again, walking his shots up the target's torso. There was no kick against his shoulder, only a slight, vibrating hum through the chassis of the weapon as the power pack cycled. No recoil, Archer noted, lowering the weapon. He looked at Kirk, then at the two Picards who were observing from the gallery. It's faster than a phase rifle. You can stay on target indefinitely. Exactly, Shepard said, having already familiarized himself with his own borrowed DC-15 as he was firing rapid. Controlled bursts downrange, his eyes wide with genuine appreciation. No windage, no bullet drop. It just goes exactly where you point it instantly. Rodney, can we replicate these power packs? I'm a physicist, Major, not a galactic quartermaster, McKay snapped, though he was already pulling a specialized ancient scanner from his pocket to run diagnostics on the blaster's power cell. But given the sheer amount of Naquadah generators we have lying around, I imagine I could rig a localized charging station if Captain Rex provides the schematics for the magnetic containment field. Ronan Dex had been standing silently in the back, leaning against a pillar, watching the entire exchange with a look of deep, stoic boredom. His own weapon, an incredibly powerful particle magnum, was holstered at his thigh. He finally pushed off the pillar and walked to the crate. He bypassed the carbines and the pistols entirely. He reached his massive hand to the very bottom of the crate and hauled up a Z6 rotary blaster cannon. Rex actually took a half step back. Whoa, big guy, that's a squad support weapon. It requires a tripod or a specialized harness. Ronan didn't answer. He hoisted the massive, multi-barreled cannon with one hand, bracing the rear grip against his hip with the other. He thumbed the activation switch. The barrels began to spin, building up a terrifying, high-pitched whine. Ronan grinned. It was a feral, dangerous expression that made even Anakin Skywalker pause. Ronan pulled the trigger. The firing range was instantly bathed in strobe light blue. A literal river of plasma erupted from the Z6, a deafening, continuous roar that drowned out everything else in the room. Ronan swept the heavy cannon left and right, completely obliterating not just the holographic targets, but tearing deep, glowing scorch marks into the ancient energy-absorbing plating of the back wall. The heat in the room spiked instantly, the smell of ozone and superheated metal overpowering the scent of cordite. After a solid 10 seconds of sustained fire, Ronan released the trigger. The barrels slowly spun to a halt, smoking heavily. The back wall of the range was a glowing, molten mess of blue energy trying to restabilize. Ronan looked at the heavy cannon in his hands, then looked over at Shepard. I want one of these. Shepard sighed, rubbing his forehead. I'll talk to the quartermaster, Chewie. As the ringing in their ears began to subside, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The novelty of the cross-training was wearing off, replaced by the grim reality of why they were doing this. They were a fractured coalition of heroes, stranded in a hostile galaxy, preparing to fight a war against an enemy that numbered in the billions. Anakin deactivated his lightsaber, which he had ignited purely to compare the plasma glow to the blasters. The strategy is sound. If we use Earth kinetics and Republic blasters on our initial strikes, the Wraith will assume they are dealing with a mid-tier technological civilization. A well-armed one, but not an ancient or highly advanced one. It preserves our greatest assets, Spock agreed, walking over to examine the scorch marks Ronan had left on the wall. If they do not encounter phaser technology, metaphasic shielding, or the Force, they will not deploy their full armada to crush us. We must remain beneath their strategic threshold. Guerrilla warfare, Captain Rex said, his voice dropping an octave. We hit their supply lines. We find their culling ships and we tear them apart from the inside. We don't fight them in open space. We fight them in the mud, in the dark, and in the corridors of their own hives. Teyla Emagan stepped forward, her face lined with the sorrow of a woman who had lived her entire life under the shadow of the Wraith. You speak of war with a familiarity that is both comforting and terrifying. The Wraith are not battle droids, Captain Rex. They are not the Xindi, Captain Archer. They do not fight for territory or ideology. They fight to eat. If we anger them, they will not just hunt us. They will punish every human world in this galaxy for our defiance. The older Jean-Luc Picard, who had remained silent for the duration of the weapons test, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried the absolute authority of a man who had stared into the abyss of the Borg Collective and survived. "Then we must ensure they never realize it is us who are defying them," Picard said, stepping into the center of the group. "We will be ghosts. We will strike and vanish. We will use their arrogance against them. They believe they are the apex predators of this galaxy. It is time we taught them that there are darker things hiding in the shadows than they are." Luke Skywalker looked at his father, then at Picard, then at Shepard. He felt the currents of the Force swirling around this impossibly diverse room. There was fear, yes, but there was also an unbreakable, crystalline resolve. "May the Force be with us all," Luke whispered. "And live long and prosper," Spock added quietly. Shepard picked up his P-90 and slung it over his shoulder. "All right, training's over. Let's go hunt some vampires." Part 3. The Lantean War Games. The air on the Lantean mainland was thick, a humid soup of alien pollen and the loamy scent of decaying jungle vegetation. High above, the canopy of massive, fern-like trees blocked out the midday sun, casting the forest floor into a permanent, emerald twilight. It was the perfect environment for an ambush. It was also the perfect environment for a massacre, which was precisely what the Joint Strike Team was trying to avoid. Deep within a natural ravine, flanked by sheer cliffs of moss-covered basalt, the Blue Team was digging in. They were a motley collection of soldiers, explorers, and mystics, united by a singular, immediate problem. In less than 20 minutes, 3 full companies of the Republic's 501st Legion were going to descend upon them with everything they had. Captain Rex crouched behind a fallen, petrified log, his helmet off, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. He looked down the line at his designated fire team, 4 ARC troopers he had handpicked for their adaptability. Beside them crouched Captain Jonathan Archer and his detachment of MACOs from the Enterprise NX-01. The Military Assault Command Operations soldiers looked slightly out of their depth but grimly determined, their bulky camouflage armor contrasting with the sleek, white plastid of the clones. "Listen up," Rex said, his voice a low, raspy gravel that carried easily over the ambient hum of the jungle insects. "My brothers in the 501st are the best conventional fighting force in the Republic. For this exercise, their weapons are locked to high-yield stun, and so are ours. But don't let that fool you. A point-blank stun blast from a DC-15 will knock you out cold for hours and leave you with a concussion that feels like a starship dropped on your head. They operate in highly disciplined, overlapping fire sectors. If they catch us in a static defense, they will outflank us, suppress us, and roll right over us. They are simulating a massive Wraith frontal assault. Which is exactly why we aren't giving them a static defense," Major John Shepard chimed in, leaning against a tree trunk. He held a DC-15S carbine, having traded his beloved P-90 for the exercise to better understand the clone weaponry. "We're playing Wraith bait. We let them advance, we bleed their vanguard with traps, and we fade into the jungle, asymmetrical warfare. We want them confused, frustrated, and chasing ghosts." "Speaking of ghosts," Anakin Skywalker said, dropping down from the branches above with a silent, feline grace. His dark Jedi robes were already smeared with Lantean mud. "Luke and I have rigged the upper canopy. The perimeter is seeded with flashbangs and sonic disruptors, but I sense them coming. They're moving fast. Airborne gunships dropped them 3 clicks north, and they are sweeping south in a wedge formation." Luke Skywalker materialized from the brush behind his father. He wore his black Jedi tunic, his lightsaber clipped to his belt, though he carried a modified clone stun pistol in his hand. The dynamic between the two was still a source of quiet fascination for the rest of the team. Anakin treated Luke with a fiercely protective, almost competitive edge, while Luke projected a calm, centering aura that seemed to naturally blunt Anakin's more reckless impulses. They have heavy repeaters, Luke noted, his eyes closed as he felt the approaching army through the Force. And scanners, lots of scanners. Which is where I come in, Dr. Rodney McKay announced, his voice tight with anxiety. He was huddled beneath a camouflage tarp, frantically typing on a cobbled-together console that looked like a severe violation of several technological prime directives. It was a chaotic splice of a Lantian crystal matrix, a Starfleet tricorder provided by Spock, and a clone compact. Beside him, Ezra Bridger was holding two exposed wires together, his tongue poking out the side of his mouth in concentration. "Are you sure this will work, Rodney?" Teyla Emagan asked smoothly, her Bantos rod secured to her back. She held an Earth-made P-90, recognizing the value of its compact size in the dense brush. "Of course I'm sure, assuming the kid doesn't short out the hyper-relay," McKay snapped. "The 501st relies on a unified, encrypted tactical network. It's brilliant, really, but inherently vulnerable to brute force subspace jamming. When they cross the perimeter, Ezra and I are going to flood their comms with localized white noise and phantom sensor readings. Their scanners are going to tell them there's a battalion of us to their east, when we're actually right here." "Just say the word, Doc," Ezra said, grinning. "All right," Captain Archer said, hefting his phase rifle. He looked at the MACO commander. "Major Hayes, deploy the pulse traps, set them for a chain detonation." The MACOs moved with silent, practiced efficiency, burying small, disc-shaped Starfleet stun mines under the soft loam of the ravine floor. "Positions," Shepard ordered. "Jedi in the trees. Clones and MACOs form the anvil here. My team will be the hammer. Let's make them sweat." The blue team vanished into the foliage just as the first sounds of the approaching 501st reached them. It wasn't the chaotic crashing of a disorganized mob. It was the rhythmic, terrifying crunch of hundreds of armored boots marching in perfect unison, accompanied by the low, sweeping hum of repulsor-lift scout speeders. From his perch high in a massive banyan-like tree, Kanan Jarrus watched the vanguard approach. He was blind, but through the Force, the forest was brilliantly illuminated. He could see the bright, disciplined auras of the clone troopers moving in a perfect V formation. "Patience," Kanan whispered into his combead. Below him, a pair of 501st Scout troopers on speeder bikes hovered into the ravine. They swept their helmets side to side, their sensors trying to pierce the gloom. "Now McKay," Shepard's voice cracked over the earpiece. In his hideout, McKay slammed his hand down on the Lantian console, initiating spoof sequence. Instantly, the two scout troopers jerked their speeders to a halt. Their comm channels erupted in a screech of white noise, and their heads-up displays flooded with hundreds of false red dots originating from the eastern ridge. Confused, the scouts rotated their bikes toward the phantom threat. "Hayes, take them," Archer whispered. From beneath the mud, the MACO pulse traps detonated. A wave of shimmering, blue-phased energy erupted upward. It wasn't lethal, but the concentrated stun field overloaded the speeder bike's repulsor engines and struck the riders with the force of a physical blow. The bikes groaned and dropped to the earth, the two scouts slumping over their handlebars, completely unconscious. "Contact frontal ambush," a voice yelled from the tree line. The main body of the 501st poured into the ravine. Blue stun bolts instantly filled the air, a torrential rain of plasma that shredded the leaves and scorched the tree trunks. The clones moved with terrifying efficiency, a wall of white armor advancing under a relentless umbrella of suppressing fire. "Open up," Rex roared. The ARC troopers and MACOs returned fire. The ravine became a chaotic crossfire of Republic blue plasma and the distinct, tighter rings of Starfleet phase stun beams. Archer dropped to one knee, sighting down his rifle, carefully picking off 501st troopers as they tried to flank the logs. The phase rifle was quieter than the clone blasters, its beam invisible until it struck, dropping 2 troopers silently into the ferns. But the 501st was too numerous. For every trooper that fell, 2 more stepped up to fill the gap. A heavy E-Web repeating blaster was hauled to the edge of the ravine, its crew quickly setting the tripod. "We're pinned," Major Hayes yelled over the din, keeping his head down as the E-Web began to chew through the petrified log they were using for cover. "We can't hold this line." "You aren't supposed to," Anakin's voice echoed, though it was impossible to tell where it came from. Suddenly, the massive canopy above the 501st began to groan. Anakin and Luke, standing on opposing branches 50 feet in the air, reached out with their hands. Through the force, they found the structural weaknesses in a dead, massive branch hanging directly over the E-Web crew. With a synchronized pull, they tore it free. The branch, the size of a shuttlecraft, plummeted downward. The clones looked up, shouting warnings, and scattered. The branch smashed into the ravine, crushing the E-Web repeater and kicking up a massive cloud of dirt and pulverized wood. Fall back to Point Beta," Shepard yelled. Under the cover of the falling debris and the dust cloud, Archer, Rex, and the MACOs broke from their cover, sprinting backward up the far side of the ravine. The 501st immediately surged forward to pursue, their commander, a seasoned clone captain, barking orders to close the gap. As the 501st rushed into the center of the ravine, Kanan and Ezra dropped from the trees directly behind their lines. They didn't ignite their lightsabers. Instead, they moved like phantoms, utilizing martial arts enhanced by the Force. Ezra swept the legs out from under a clone trooper, grabbed the falling man's DC-15, and fired 2 stun blasts into the backs of the adjacent squad before discarding the weapon and vaulting back into the brush. Kanan used a force push to send 3 troopers crashing into each other in a clatter of armor, disrupting their advance before he, too, vanished into the jungle. "They're in the trees. Watch your 6, a clone sergeant yelled, his discipline momentarily fracturing under the invisible assault. The 501st commander halted the advance, forming his men into a defensive circle. "Scanner sweep. Give me thermal." "Comms are still jammed, Captain. Scanners are useless. We're picking up localized radiation bursts all around us." A tech trooper responded, hitting the side of his helmet in frustration. A mile away, McKay grinned, tapping the Lantean console. "Take that, you engineered super soldiers. Who needs midichlorians when you have a functioning brain and a mastery of subspace mechanics?" "Don't get cocky, Rodney," Shepard's voice came over the localized, shielded comlink. "They're regrouping. We need to hit them hard and break their formation before they realize we don't have the numbers to sustain this." Shepard, Tala, and Raanan were positioned on a high ridge, overlooking the defensive circle of the 501st. "Raanan," Shepard said softly, "it's time." Raanan Dex cracked his neck. He stepped out from behind a massive fern, hoisting the Republic Z6 rotary blaster cannon. He had spent the last 2 days working with Rex and the Yamato engineers to dial down the lethal yield of the weapon, turning it into a devastating, wide-area stun cannon. Raanan planted his feet, aiming down into the ravine. He squeezed the trigger. The Z6 spooled up with a terrifying shriek and unleashed a literal tidal wave of blue stun energy. The volume of fire was incomprehensible. It wasn't a precision strike. It was a localized weather event. The sheer kinetic impact of the heavy stun bolts slammed into the 501st formation like a physical wall. Troopers were thrown backward, their armor sparking as the high-yield energy overloaded their systems and drove them into unconsciousness. "Suppressive fire," the clone captain yelled, trying to coordinate a counterattack against Raanan's position. But the moment they popped their heads up to aim, the blue storm hammered them back down. While Raanan kept the main body pinned, Shepard and Tala flanked the formation. Tala, using her P90, fired short, controlled bursts. The kinetic 5.7mm rounds, replaced with specialized, non-lethal gel impact slugs for the exercise, hit the clones with enough force to stagger them, allowing Shepard to pick them off with precise stun shots from his DC-15S. The 501st was a highly adaptable force. Realizing they were being trapped in a kill box, the clone captain made a desperate call. "Break out! All units, wedge formation, push the eastern ridge. Ignore the heavy gunner." The clones, showing their legendary resilience, rallied. They ignored Ronnon's devastating fire, taking the losses, and surged up the eastern ridge, firing blindly into the jungle. "They're pushing out," Rex warned over the comms. "They're headed right for the command post." Mackay shrieked. "What? No, they're supposed to stay in the ravine. That was the tactical parameter." "They're adapting, Doc," Ezra said, drawing his stun pistol. "Time to go." The 501st Vanguard crested the ridge, bursting into the clearing where Mackay and Ezra had set up the jamming station. "Drop the weapons, hands in the air," a clone lieutenant barked, his rifle aimed squarely at Mackay's chest. Mackay raised his hands immediately. Okay, I surrender. I'm a non-combatant. Well, technically a combatant, but a fragile one." Before the clones could secure them, the air in the clearing seemed to vibrate. Luke Skywalker stepped out of the shadows, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "You don't need to capture them," Luke said, his voice imbued with the gentle, subtle manipulation of the Force mind trick. The clone lieutenant blinked, his posture relaxing slightly. "I don't need to capture them." "You want to secure the perimeter down by the river," Luke suggested. "I want to secure the perimeter down by the river," the lieutenant repeated, lowering his weapon and turning to his squad. "Come on, men, river perimeter." The squad turned and marched back down the hill. Mackay stared at Luke, his jaw slack. That is the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. Can you do that to the Wraith?" "Wraith minds are complex, connected to a hive," Luke said, his expression strained. "It's much harder, and these clones are highly conditioned. It only worked because they were already confused." Suddenly, the jungle erupted around them. The main body of the 501st had broken through Ronnon's suppression and flooded the ridge. There were no mind tricks left to play. There were simply too many of them. Anakin landed in the center of the clearing, his blue lightsaber igniting with a crisp snap. He didn't use it to strike, but spun it in a blinding arc, catching and deflecting a dozen incoming stun bolts back into the jungle. "We're surrounded," Archer yelled, running into the clearing alongside Rex and the surviving MACOs, all of them breathing heavily. They formed a tight defensive circle around Mackay's console. The clone captain stepped into the clearing, flanked by 2 platoons of troopers. "Stand down, blue team. You fought well, but you're out of room and out of men. Exercise over." Shepard walked into the clearing from the opposite side, his carbine lowered. He looked around at the ring of white armor. "You think so, Captain?" "I know so, Major," the clone replied. "We've taken heavy simulated casualties, but we hold the high ground, we've broken your lines, and we have your command center. In a real scenario, the Wraith would feed on you right now." "Except," a voice said from directly behind the clone captain. The captain stiffened. He slowly turned his head. Standing there, perfectly still, was Tala Emagan. She had a Lantean stunner pressed firmly against the base of the clone captain's neck. "You focused so heavily on the Jedi, the heavy weapons and the jamming signals," Tala said softly, "that you forgot to watch your own shadow. In a Wraith hive, cutting off the head is the only way to kill the beast." The clearing was dead silent. The clone captain let out a long, slow breath, then raised his hands and tapped his helmet comms. "All 501st units, stand down. The commander has been assassinated. Blue team takes the objective." A collective groan echoed through the jungle as the clones lowered their weapons. Rex walked over to the 501st captain, pulling off his own helmet and offering a rare grin. "Sloppy, brother. You chased the noise and ignored the quiet." The captain removed his helmet, revealing a face identical to Rex's, though currently smeared with mud and frustration. They don't fight like droids, Rex, and they certainly don't fight like separatists. That jamming signal was brutal, and those phased energy weapons. He looked over at Archer and the MACOs. We've never seen energy displacement like that. And the Jedi, sir, with all due respect, dropping trees on us. Anakin powered down his lightsaber, clipping it to his belt with a smirk. The environment is a weapon, Captain. The Wraith know this galaxy better than we do. We have to use every rock, every tree, and every trick we have if we're going to survive them. Shepard clapped his hands together. All right, debrief in 1 hour back in Atlantis. Rodney, pack up your magic box. Rex, Archer, good coordination. The cross-faction comms held up under pressure. As the joint team began to hike back toward the concealed jumper that would take them to the city, Archer fell into step beside Shepard. The Starfleet captain looked back at the 500 First Troopers, who were helping their stunned comrades to their feet. They're a formidable army, Major, Archer noted. But I see your point. If we march them out onto a battlefield against the Wraith, we'll lose simply by attrition. Exactly, Shepard agreed. The Ancients lost a conventional war because the Wraith just kept coming. We can't outshoot them. We have to outthink them, and today proved we can. Luke Skywalker walked alongside Kanan and Ezra, the young Jedi in training practically vibrating with adrenaline. Did you see when I flipped that guy? And Rodney's jammer. This is going to work, Kanan. We can beat the Wraith. Don't get overconfident, Ezra, Kanan warned, though he allowed a small smile. Today was a simulation. Our blasters were set to stun, and our enemies were brothers. When we step through that Stargate for real, the enemy won't be playing by any rules. Far above them, hidden in the upper atmosphere beneath the multiphasic cloaking field, the 5 iterations of the Starship Enterprise held their silent vigil, while deep below the ocean waves, the Yamato and the Resolute waited in the dark. The mock battle was over, but the true war for the Pegasus Galaxy was only just beginning. Part 4, Exercise Vanguard. The transition from the humid, canopy-covered mainland of Lantia to the sterile, heavily armored command centers of the orbital and submerged fleet was jarring, yet necessary. The wargames had proven that their ground forces could adapt, blending Republic, Lantian, and Earth tactics into a deadly, asymmetric whole. But ground engagements would only slow the Wraith. To truly turn the tide, the newly formed multiversal coalition needed to command the stars. The command staffs shuttled via ancient puddle jumpers and Starfleet transporters from Atlantis to their respective vessels. Beneath the crushing depths of the Lantian Ocean, the Republic Venator-class Star Destroyer Resolute and the space battleship Yamato powered up their colossal drives, their ascent masked by the thermal vents and heavy magnetic interference of the ocean floor. In the upper atmosphere, the 5 iterations of the USS Enterprise dropped their linked multiphasic cloak for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough for the submerged Titans to break orbit and fall into a tight, synchronized formation alongside them. Their destination was the Taranis Nebula, a dense, highly volatile cloud of ionized gas and protostar matter located 3 parsecs from the Lantian system. It was a navigational nightmare, filled with sensory-blinding radiation and erratic gravity wells, making it completely ignored by the Wraith, who preferred clear lines of sight for their hyperspace windows. For the displaced fleet, it was the perfect, shielded training ground. Aboard the Enterprise, Captain Jean-Luc Picard stood at the center of his bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. The viewscreen depicted a swirling, bruised purple wall of cosmic gas rapidly approaching. Beside him, Commander Data's hands blurred across the operations console. "Entering the outer bands of the nebula now, Captain," Data reported, his golden eyes fixed on the readouts. "Sensor range is already degraded by 47%. I am attempting to compensate by shifting our lateral arrays to a tachyon pulse sweep, but the ambient ionized hydrogen is creating significant false positives. "Maintain the sweep, Mr. Data," the older Picard ordered. "This is exactly why we are here. If we cannot coordinate in the dark, we will be picked apart in the light." To ensure the wildly disparate communication and targeting protocols of the Galactic Republic, the United Federation of Planets, the Earth Defense Force, and Lantean Systems didn't cross-contaminate and broadcast a detectable subspace beacon to the Wraith. The chief engineers, McKay, LaForge, Tucker, and Sanada, had developed a localized, closed-loop tactical data link. To encrypt the massive flow of telemetry, they utilized a rapidly shifting, polyalphabetic cipher utilizing the Digital Handshake Protocol USS Enterprise NX-01. It was a quiet homage to Captain Archer's pioneering vessel, which now served as the digital keystone locking the multiversal armada together. On the bridge of the Resolute, General Anakin Skywalker paced the command walkway, his mechanical hand resting on the hilt of his lightsaber. The Venator's massive, wedge-shaped hull was buffeted by the electromagnetic currents of the nebula. "Admiral Yularen, what is the status of our fighter wings?" Anakin asked, looking out the massive viewport at the shifting purple fog. V-19 Torrents and ARC-170s are loaded into the launch tubes, General, Yularen replied crisply. Commander Skywalker's X-Wing is prepped in the port hangar. However, targeting computers are severely hindered by the gas cloud. The pilots will have to rely on visual confirmation and manual tracking. "Good," Anakin smirked. "It builds character. Signal the fleet. Initiate exercise Vanguard." The fleet plunged deeper into the nebula, the ambient light outside their viewports dropping to near zero, replaced only by the erratic flashes of static lightning arcing across their hulls. The exercise called for the Enterprise D and the Enterprise E to break formation and act as heavy Wraith hive ships. With their massive size, thick deflector shields, and ability to modulate their phaser banks to mimic the low-frequency, high-yield plasma bursts of Wraith weaponry, they were terrifyingly accurate stand-ins. The Enterprise D, under the command of the younger Captain Picard, veered off to port, banking heavily into a dense cloud of tritanium-laced dust. "Helm, bring us around on a bearing of 020 Mark IV. Tactical, lock tractor beams onto the Yamato and the Resolute, but do not engage. Let us see how quickly they can detect a lock in this soup." Aboard the Yamato, Captain Suzumu Kodai gripped the railing of his command deck. The bridge was a symphony of analog dials, digital readouts, and the hum of the wave motion engine. "Captain, we are being painted by a localized gravitational anomaly. It's consistent with a tractor beam lock from the Enterprise D," Tactical Officer Shima reported, his hands flying over the firing controls. "They found us fast," Kodai muttered. "Divert auxiliary power to the shock cannons. Load Type 3 antimatter rounds. Fire a proximity spread into the gas cloud. Coordinate 020. Let's shake them off." The Yamato's forward turrets rotated with a heavy, mechanical groan. Massive beams of positron energy lanced out into the purple fog, detonating not against the Enterprise D, but in the space directly between them. The resulting shockwave of displaced gas and energy shattered the tractor beam lock, causing the Galaxy-class starship's sensors to momentarily white out. "Lock broken," Data reported on the Enterprise E. "The Yamato is using the environmental density as a force multiplier. Impressive tactical adaptation." "Our turn, Mr. Data," Picardi said. "Bring us over the top of the Resolute. Target their hangar bays with low-yield quantum torpedoes. Let us test General Skywalker's screening capabilities." The sleek, Sovereign-class Enterprise E dove through the nebula, cutting a clean wake through the gas. As it passed over the massive dorsal spine of the Resolute, it unleashed a spread of glowing blue torpedoes. Before the torpedoes could even cross half the distance, the Resolute's hangar doors irised open. A swarm of ARC-170 heavy fighters and V-Wing interceptors poured out, their engines flaring bright against the gloom. Leading the pack was a solitary, cross-winged fighter. Luke Skywalker pulled his X-Wing into a steep climb, his strike foils locking into attack position. R2-D2 beeped frantically, feeding raw, uncompressed telemetry into Luke's targeting computer. "I see them, Ardu," Luke said, his voice calm over the comms. He didn't rely entirely on the targeting box. He felt the trajectory of the quantum torpedoes through the Force. "Rogue group, break by pairs. Intercept and destroy the incoming ordnance." Luke snapped his control yoke, rolling his X-Wing on its axis, and squeezed the trigger. 4 distinct bolts of red laser fire converged on the lead torpedo, detonating it prematurely in a brilliant blue flash. The clone pilots followed suit, their coordinated fire creating an impenetrable flak screen that absorbed the Enterprise's simulated attack. Meanwhile, the smaller ships, Captain Kirk's 1701, Garrett's 1701C, and Archer's NX-01, were darting through the lower bands of the nebula, simulating Wraith cruisers. They utilized the tactical data link to share microsecond sensor updates, allowing them to perform dangerously close flyby maneuvers without colliding in the blinding gas. Kirk leaned forward in his command chair, eyes locked on the main viewer. "Mr. Sulu, bring us in tight under the Resolute's deflector shields. Mr. Spock, the moment we break the sensor threshold, flood their lower decks with a simulated tachyon burst. Let's see if their clone troopers can handle a localized boarding party simulation." "Captain," Spock said, his brow furrowing as he stared into his blue-lit scanner hood, "I am reading an anomaly. It is not generating from any vessel within our data link." Kirk frowned. "Elaborate, Spock. Is it a glitch in the nebula's magnetic field?" "Negative, Captain. The signature is biological in nature, encased in an advanced polytritanium alloy. It is a starship, a Wraith cruiser to be precise, and it is accompanied by several dozen smaller craft, darts." Kirk hit the comm stud on the arm of his chair. "Kirk to Fleet Command. Break off the exercise. We have live hostiles in the nebula. Sector 4, bearing 090. Aboard the Enterprise, Picard's expression darkened. "Red alert. Shields up, tactical parity. Mr. Worf, can they see us?" "The nebula is scattering their active sensors, Captain, but our combat maneuvers have created significant thermal blooms," Worf growled, his hands hovering over the tactical console. "They are moving to investigate. They are charging weapons." Aboard the Resolute, Anakin's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a simulation anymore. They must have been using the nebula to mask their own radiation signatures while dormant. "Yularen, recall the fighters." "Negative, General," Luke's voice crackled over the comms. "If we recall now, the darts will trace our exhaust trails right back to the hangar bays. Let us screen the capital ships." "Luke is right," Captain Rex's voice joined from the Resolute's bridge. "We need to eliminate them completely, General. If a single dart escapes this nebula and reports our energy signatures back to a hive ship, our low-tech illusion is blown. We'll have the entire Wraith armada dropping on our heads by tomorrow." The commanders of the fleet shared a grim silence across the network. They were trapped between their desire to remain hidden and the absolute necessity of absolute destruction. "We cannot use standard Federation weaponry," Picard stated over the channel. "If the Wraith recover debris with phaser scoring or quantum signatures, it will raise too many questions." "Then we hit them with blunt force," Kodai said from the Yamato. "Kinetic impact and plasma. General Skywalker, can your fighters handle the darts?" "With pleasure, Captain Kodai," Anakin replied. "Luke, you have tactical command of the fighter wings. Clear the skis. Resolute will bring main turbolasers online. We'll use low-frequency plasma bolts. It'll look like standard, albeit heavy, localized ion weaponry." "Understood," Luke said, his X-Wing diving toward the encroaching swarm of Wraith darts. The darts were fast, terrifyingly so. They moved less like mechanical starfighters and more like a swarm of angry hornets, their engines screaming as they cut through the purple gas. They opened fire, blue energy bolts splashing uselessly against the heavy shields of the ARC-170s. "Stay in formation," Luke ordered. "They're fast, but they have no deflector shields. Lead your targets." Luke reached out with the force. The nebula, the gas, the static lightning, it all faded away, replaced by the bright, malevolent intent of the Wraith pilots. He anticipated a dart's evasive roll before the pilot even executed it. Firing a burst of red lasers into the exact space, the dart occupied a fraction of a second later. The alien fighter shattered into a cloud of organic debris. The clone pilots of the 501st were ruthless. They formed interlocking fields of fire, trapping the highly maneuverable darts in boxes of deadly plasma. Below the dogfight, the massive Wraith cruiser emerged from the gloom. It was a hideous, organic-looking vessel, covered in spiked plating and glowing with malevolent blue energy. It locked its forward weapons onto the nearest heat signature, the Yamato. "Incoming Wraith plasma barrage," Shima yelled. "Brace for impact, wave motion shields to maximum," Kodai ordered. The Wraith energy bolts slammed into the Yamato's shields, rippling across the invisible barrier in waves of violent, dissipating heat. The battleship groaned under the assault, but the shields held firm. "Target their weapon clusters," Kodai ordered, his eyes cold. "Main shock cannons fire." The Yamato retaliated. The heavy positron shock cannons bypassed the finesse of localized targeting and simply brute-forced the Wraith cruiser. The massive kinetic and thermal impact of the Yamato's rounds tore massive, gaping wounds into the organic hull of the cruiser. The Wraith ship shuddered, venting atmosphere and green, bioluminescent fluid into the nebula. But it wasn't dead. The cruiser began to turn, its engines flaring as it prepared to open a hyperspace window and escape. "It's trying to jump," Kirk yelled from the 1701, "if it gets a signal out." "Not on my watch," Anakin snarled. "Yularen, direct all forward turbolaser batteries to their hyperspace generator. Maximum yield." The Resolute unleashed a devastating broadside. Dozens of thick, red turbolaser beams crossed the expanse of the nebula, hammering into the aft section of the Wraith cruiser. The concentrated plasma melted through the organic armor, instantly slagging the ship's hyperdrive. The cruiser went dead in the water, drifting listlessly in the gas cloud. "Cruiser disabled," Worf reported on the Enterprise. "Fighter escort has been completely neutralized by Commander Skywalker's squadrons." "Is it transmitting?" Picardy asked, leaning forward. "Negative, Captain. The turbolaser barrage destroyed their subspace antenna array. They are entirely cut off." The fleet surrounded the broken Wraith vessel. The silence that followed was heavy with consequence. They had won the skirmish, but the problem of the surviving Wraith crew remained. "Captain Picard," Major Shepard's voice crackled over the secure link from Atlantis, where he was monitoring the telemetry. "We can't leave them alive and we can't take prisoners. If they don't report in, the Hive will come looking for them. We need to make it look like an environmental hazard destroyed them, a localized pocket of protostar ignition." Picard closed his eyes for a moment, wrestling with the morality of his Starfleet oath against the brutal arithmetic of survival in the Pegasus galaxy. "Understood, Major. Mr. Data, configure a Class 3 probe. Load it with a highly unstable payload of antimatter and vent our excess warp plasma into the immediate vicinity of the cruiser." "Configuring now, sir." Detonation of the probe within the vented plasma field will create a localized thermal expansion consistent with a protostar flare. The cruiser will be entirely vaporized. No debris will remain to be analyzed. "Do it." The Enterprise D launched the small, cylindrical probe. It drifted silently through the purple gas, embedding itself against the crippled hull of the Wraith cruiser. The 5 Enterprises, The Yamato and the Resolute simultaneously reversed their engines, pulling back to a safe distance as the fighter wings docked. A blinding, miniature sun ignited within the Tarani's nebula. The resulting shockwave buffeted the heavy shields of the fleet, washing the bridge view screens in blinding white light. When the sensors finally cleared, there was nothing left but scattered atoms and drifting ionized gas. The Wraith cruiser and the secret of the displaced fleet had been reduced to ash. "Exercise Vanguard is complete," Picardi said quietly, breaking the silence on the network. "All vessels re-engage cloaking protocols. Helm lay in a course for Lantia. We have much to discuss." As the multiversal armada vanished back into the shadows, the reality of their situation settled heavily upon them. They were not just survivors anymore. They were the architects of a shadow war, and they had just fired the first, untraceable shot. Part 5, The Shadow Ford. The command center of Atlantis was a hive of quiet, focused urgency. The hum of Lantian control crystals harmonized with the low, steady beeping of Starfleet tactical consoles that had been integrated into the city's ancient architecture. In the center of the room, the primary holographic projector flickered to life, bathing the faces of Dr. Elizabeth Weir, Major John Shepard, and Captain James T. Kirk in a pallid, synthetic starlight. Floating in the air above the projection table was a chaotic, three-dimensional topographical map of a star system located approximately 15 light-years from Lantia. It was not a hospitable place. The center of the projection was dominated by the angry, swirling remnant of a red dwarf star, surrounded by a massive, grinding halo of hyperdense asteroids, pulverized planetary crust, and frozen gas clouds. The transmission from the Ghost came in through the encrypted subspace data link 10 minutes ago, Dr. Rodney McKay announced, walking briskly into the command center with a datapad clutched to his chest. He tapped a sequence of keys on a peripheral console, zooming the hologram in on a specific, massive fragment of space debris orbiting the dead star. According to Hera Syndulla's sensor telemetry, this system suffered a catastrophic stellar event, a red dwarf supernova. Roughly 200 years before the Ancient and Wraith War officially kicked off. A red dwarf supernova is exceedingly rare, Commander Data noted, stepping up beside Captain Kirk. The physics required to trigger such an event usually imply external, artificial manipulation of the stellar core. "Exactly," McKay said, pointing a finger at the android. "Which brings us to Hera's discovery. The Ghost was utilizing the Yamato tachyon scanners to map blind spots in the Wraith patrol routes. They hid in this asteroid field to avoid a passing hive ship. While running passive deep penetration scans on the surrounding debris to mask their thermal bloom, they found this." McKay tapped another key. The hologram zoomed in closer on a monolithic chunk of rock, roughly the size of Earth's moon, though jagged and broken on one side. Deep within the center of the holographic rock, a tiny, pulsing blue light appeared. "A Stargate," Shepard said, crossing his arms. "Not just a Stargate," McKay corrected, his eyes wide with a manic, caffeinated energy. "A fully active Lantian subspace signature. Hera ran a localized deep scan. The interior of that moon fragment is hollow. There is an ancient outpost inside it, but here is the problem. The Ghost has spent the last 6 hours doing high-risk proximity flights around the moon. There are no hangar doors. There are no access tunnels, no exhaust ports, no visible seams. It is a solid, unbroken shell of hyperdense metamorphic rock. They can't find a way inside from the outside. If it was built before the war, why isn't it in the Atlantis database?" Weir asked, frowning at the projection. "I've spent the last hour searching," McKay replied, rubbing his temples. "There is absolutely no record of an outpost in that system, which means one of three things. The information was lost during the chaos of the Wraith siege, the files were deliberately deleted by the Lantian High Command, or this facility was classified at a level so far above top secret that it wasn't even networked to the central Atlantis mainframe." "A black site," Captain Kirk murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Starfleet has had a few of those in its time. They usually hide things that change the balance of power. Or things that destroy it," Weir added cautiously. "Regardless of what it is, if it's Lantian, we need it," Shepard said. "If the Wraith don't know it's there, it could be a safe haven, a weapons cache, or a tactical staging ground. Rodney, can we dial the gate from here?" "Ah, well, that was the tricky part," McKay said, waving his hand dismissively. "The stellar drift in that sector over the last 10,000 years, compounded by the gravitational chaos of the supernova, made calculating the exact spatial coordinates a nightmare. But thankfully, I had help." From the lower level of the control room, Commander Charles Tucker III jogged up the stairs, wiping a smudge of grease from his blue Starfleet jumpsuit. "Hey, folks. Yeah, me and Rodney managed to crunch the numbers. I used the NX-01 stellar cartography algorithms to backtrack the gravitational decay of the asteroid field, and Rodney adapted the Lantian dialing computer to compensate. We have a lock on the gate address." "Excellent work, Commander," Captain Jonathan Archer said, stepping into the room alongside Major Hayes, the commander of his MACO detachment. "If we are going into a blind, sealed facility that has been dark for 10 millennia, we need to be prepared for anything. Hard vacuum, automated defense systems, structural collapse, or biological hazards. My MACOs are specialized in breaching and clearing abandoned hostile facilities, Captain," Major Hayes stated, his posture rigid. "We're ready." "You won't be going alone," a deep, raspy voice echoed from the corridor. Captain Rex strode into the room, his white and blue plastoid armor scuffed but impeccably maintained. He was carrying his heavy DC-15S blaster carbine. "The 501st has extensive experience in derelict boarding actions. I'll take point. And we will provide unconventional support," Obi-Wan Kenobi added, entering alongside Anakin and Luke Skywalker. The three Jedi radiated a calm, centered energy that seemed to slightly lower the ambient temperature in the room. Anakin's mechanical hand rested lightly on his belt, while Luke carried a heavy utility pack over his shoulder. "All right," Shepard said, taking charge of the tactical layout. "It's a joint operation. Captain Archer, you and Major Hayes have the MACOs. Rex, you're with my team. Me, Tyler, Ronan, and McKay. The Jedi will act as forward scouts. And since we have no idea what kind of engineering nightmares are waiting in the dark, we're bringing the heavy hitters." "You rang?" Lieutenant Commander Geordi LaForge asked with a warm smile, walking in behind the Jedi. The chief engineer of the Enterprise tapped his golden visor. "Trip, Rodney and I have been comparing notes on Lantian crystal matrices. If there's a locked door, a broken generator, or a corrupted database between the three of us, we'll crack it." Weir looked over the assembled strike force. It was a staggering collection of talent, firepower, and intellect spanning multiple galaxies and timelines. "Major Shepard, radio the Ghost. Tell them we are dialing the gate now. Instruct Hera to hold her position in the asteroid field and continue scanning for any anomalies. If the Stargate gets cut off or malfunctions, we may need her to find a way to blast us out of there." "Understood, Doc," Shepard said. He tapped his earpiece. "Atlantis to Ghost. Hera, we have the address. We're stepping through now. Keep the engine warm and your eyes open. If things go sideways, you're our only ride home." "Copy that, Major." Hera's voice crackled over the localized subspace link, slightly distorted by the nebula gas. "The Ghost is holding stealth orbit in the debris field. May the Force be with you." Shepard nodded to the control technician. "Dial it up." The massive Stargate in the center of the embarkation room spun to life. The inner ring rotated with a heavy, grinding mechanical roar, locking the chevrons in place one by one. The seventh chevron locked with a resounding boom, and the event horizon erupted outward in a violent burst of unstable blue energy before settling into a shimmering, watery pool. "MACOs, weapons hot, atmospheric seals engaged," Major Hayes ordered, snapping his helmet into place. The Starfleet soldiers raised their phase rifles, the beams set to maximum stun with a lethal secondary toggle ready. Captain Rex pulled his bucket helmet down, the visor glowing faintly as his heads-up display booted up. "Clones, let's move." Shepard chambered around in his P-90. "See you on the other side." The team stepped through the event horizon. The transition from the bright, airy architecture of Atlantis to the hidden moon base was instantaneous and jarring. The team emerged from the Stargate into absolute, suffocating darkness. The air was incredibly stale, tasting of ozone, metallic dust, and the deep, cold scent of undisturbed millennia. Gravity was present, but it felt slightly heavy, pulling at their boots. "Flashlights," Shepard ordered, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous space. Beams of harsh, white light from Earth weapons, Starfleet phase rifles, and clone trooper shoulder lamps cut through the gloom. They had arrived in a massive receiving hall, similar in design to Atlantis, but distinctly more utilitarian. The elegant, sweeping curves of the city were replaced by sharp angles, exposed metallic conduits, and heavy, reinforced bulkheads. The walls were lined with dormant consoles covered in a thick layer of gray dust. "Atmosphere is breathable," Geordi announced, looking around, his visor painting the room in a spectrum of thermal and electromagnetic colors. "A bit heavy on the nitrogen, but life support is functioning on a minimal, automated baseline. Ambient temperature is 5 degrees Celsius. Perimeter secure," Major Hayes reported, as the MACOs fanned out, covering the 4 massive archways leading out of the gate room. Anakin closed his eyes, reaching out with the Force. The silence of the base was not empty, it was heavy with the psychic residue of its former occupants. "There is no life here," he said softly, "but there is a deep sense of purpose, focus, urgency. Whatever they were doing here, they were running out of time." "Rodney, Trip, see if you can wake up this local DHD," Shepard instructed, pointing to the dial-home device near the gate. "I want to make sure the door doesn't lock behind us." Trip knelt beside the console, pulling a Starfleet tricorder from his belt while McKay began brushing the dust off the Lantean crystals. "Power conduits are intact, but they're barely trickling," Trip muttered, reading the tiny screen. "It's like the whole station is running on a watch battery." "It's a localized subspace capacitor," McKay corrected, though his tone was unusually subdued. He was looking around the room with a growing sense of awe. "It's designed to keep the gate active and the life support from freezing over. We need to find the main reactor if we want to see what this place really is." "We move in formation," Captain Archer commanded, raising his phase rifle. "Hayes, take the point. Rex, secure the rear. Geordi, keep your eyes open for structural weaknesses. This place has been sitting next to a supernova remnant for 10,000 years. We don't know how stable the rock is." The team moved cautiously out of the gate room and down the primary corridor. The architecture was undeniably ancient, but it lacked the aesthetic polish of Atlantis. It looked like an industrial staging ground. As they pushed deeper into the facility, sweeping their lights across the walls, the true nature of the outpost began to reveal itself. They entered a massive, multi-tiered chamber. The flashlights illuminated enormous, half-finished mechanical skeletons suspended from the ceiling by heavy anti-gravity clamps. "Look at this," Shepard whispered, stepping closer to one of the structures. It was a sleek, aerodynamic chassis, instantly recognizable to anyone from the Atlantis expedition. "Puddle jumpers," Tayla said, her eyes wide. "Not just jumpers," Geordi said, stepping over to a larger construction bay. He ran his hand over the metallic curve of a partially assembled hull. "This vessel is significantly larger. It has the footprint of a Starfleet runabout, maybe even a small corvette. Heavy ablative armor plating, dedicated weapon mounts. This isn't a civilian transport, it's a warship." "An early scientific workshop and manufacturing hub," Obi-Wan deduced, stroking his beard as he looked around the silent factory. "They were building a fleet here, in secret." They were trying to mass-produce advanced weaponry away from the front lines of the Wraith War, Rex noted, his tactical mind assessing the layout. A shadow forge. As they moved toward the back of the manufacturing tier, their path was suddenly blocked. The ceiling of the corridor had collapsed, bringing down hundreds of tons of solid metamorphic rock and twisted tritanium support beams. It completely sealed off the route to the deeper sections of the base. Major Hayes examined the blockage. This isn't battle damage. It looks like a localized seismic event, probably a shockwave from the supernova that penetrated the outer crust. He looked at Archer. We can try to blast through with the phase rifles, Captain, but the energy displacement might bring the rest of the ceiling down on our heads. Anakin stepped forward, unhooking his lightsaber from his belt. He didn't ignite it. He looked at Luke. You feel that? Luke nodded, stepping up beside his father. The support structures behind the rock face are still intact, but they're bearing a massive load. If we shift the primary boulders, the rest will cascade. Then we don't shift them, Anakin said, a confident smile playing on his lips. We hold them. Major Hayes, Captain Rex, get your men ready to cut. Anakin and Luke raised their hands toward the collapsed ceiling. They didn't strain. They simply connected to the massive weight of the stone and metal. Through the force, they visualized the interlocking pieces of debris and seized them, locking them into spatial stasis. Go, Anakin commanded, his voice tight. Hayes and Rex didn't hesitate. The MACOs and clones stepped forward, drawing specialized plasma cutting torches from their utility webbing. Guided by Geordi, who used his visor to pinpoint the exact structural load-bearing points, the soldiers began to slice away the rock. Blue and orange sparks showered the corridor as they carved a perfectly rectangular tunnel through the blockage, while the Jedi held millions of pounds of stone suspended above their heads. As the last piece of rock was kicked away, creating a clear path, the soldiers hurried through. Anakin and Luke stepped back, releasing their hold. The debris settled with a terrifying groan, but the tunnel held. Impressive, Archer noted, patting Luke on the shoulder as they passed. Saves us a lot of explosive ordnance. Beyond the collapse, the architecture shifted again. The industrial heavy metal aesthetic gave way to pristine, white and silver corridors lined with dormant data crystal racks. They had reached the heart of the facility. The backup command deck was a circular room dominated by a massive, central console that looked like a more complex version of the Atlantis control chair, though this one lacked a seat, designed to be operated standing up. This is it, McKay breathed, practically running to the console. He pulled out a specialized interface cable he had designed, plugging it into his Earth laptop and slapping the other end onto the Lantean crystal matrix. Trip, Geordi, power up those auxiliary stations. Let's see what the battery has left. Trip and Geordi moved to the side consoles, using Starfleet tricorders to bypass the dormant relays and manually route the lingering subspace capacitor energy into the primary data core. The room hummed, and the consoles flared to life with bright, golden Lantean text. McKay's eyes darted across his laptop screen as it translated the raw data. He stopped breathing for 3 full seconds. Rodney, Shepard asked, stepping closer, what is it? It's a gold mine. No, it's the entire Federal Reserve, McKay stammered, looking up at the group, his face pale with shock. This wasn't just a shipyard. The puddle jumpers and runabouts were secondary projects. This facility, it's a ZPM foundry. A heavy silence fell over the room. Even the Starfleet officers, who only partially understood the magnitude of a zero-point module, recognized the gravity of the revelation. For the Atlantis expedition, a ZPM was the Holy Grail. It was a device capable of powering entire cities, starships, and planetary shields by extracting vacuum energy from an artificial region of subspace. They were manufacturing them here. Weir's voice cracked over the radio link from Atlantis, having heard the translation. Manufacturing and recharging. McKay confirmed, scrolling frantically. The data core indicates they had a specialized fabrication chamber designed to stabilize the subatomic containment fields required to forge a new ZPM. And, oh my God, weapon drones. There is an automated forge on the lower levels capable of mass-producing the Squid drones used in the Atlantis defense chair. This base could single-handedly turn the tide of the war, Rex said, his voice laced with awe. There's a problem, though, Geordi said, looking up from his console. I'm reading the schematics of the outer hull. Rodney, this base is completely sealed. There is a massive hangar bay directly above us, big enough to dock a small cruiser, but the exterior wall of the moon is solid rock, 300 meters thick. No doors. How were they getting the ships and the ZPMs out? McKay frowned, typing rapidly. Let me access the hangar bay telemetry. He paused, his jaw dropping. Phasing technology. Like a cloaking device? Tripp asked. No, physical phasing, McKay explained, his voice rising in pitch. The ancients integrated a massive molecular phase-shifting generator into the outer hull of the hangar bay. It doesn't open a door. It turns the solid rock of the moon into an out-of phase state. For a brief window, objects can pass through the solid stone completely unobstructed, without displacing the matter. A wall you can fly right through, Anakin murmured. Ingenious, a perfect defense. You can't breach a door that doesn't exist. Okay, first things first, Shepard ordered. We need main power. Geordi, Tripp, can we turn the lights on without broadcasting a massive energy spike to every Wraith hive in the sector? Geordi tapped his console, his visor shifting to a deep, analytical red. I'm looking at the main reactor schematics now. It's an array of Mark IV Naquadah generators tied into a geothermal tap from the moon's core, but the shielding around the reactor room is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's a multi-alloy composite. Naquadah, tritanium, and a carbon-neutronium matrix. In English, Geordi, Archer requested. It's the ultimate stealth armor, Captain, Geordi explained, grinning. It absorbs and nullifies all detectable forms of radiation. Thermal, electromagnetic, subspace resonance, tachyon emissions. It catches everything. You could detonate a photon torpedo inside that reactor room, and the sensors on a ship a mile away wouldn't register a blip. If we power up the station, it remains practically invisible. The Wraith sensors wouldn't stand a chance of detecting it. Then let's wake this place up, Shepard said. Tripp and Geordi ran a bypass sequence, syncing their Starfleet tricorders with the Lantean startup protocols. Deep within the bowels of the moon, heavy machinery ground to life. The floor vibrated slightly. The dim, emergency lighting overhead suddenly flared into brilliant, clean white light. The air scrubbers kicked on with a heavy sigh, immediately cycling out the stale, 10,000-year-old air and replacing it with crisp, oxygen-rich atmosphere. Main power is online, Tripp reported, grinning. We have full juice. Atlantis to away team. Weir's voice came through clearly now that the base's comm relays were powered. We are reading a massive power spike on your end, but our deep space sensors aren't picking up any ambient radiation from the moon itself. The stealth shielding works. Rodney, Shepard said, turning to the scientist, you said there was a ZPM foundry. Yes, McKay said, already disconnecting his laptop. Sublevel 4. According to the logs, when the facility was evacuated, there was a small batch of ZPMs in the final stages of the forging process. They were awaiting the final subspace vacuum initiation. Show me, Geordi said, his engineering curiosity fully piqued. The trio of engineers, McKay, Tucker, and LaForge, moved with a synchronized, almost frantic energy, flanked by Raanan and Taylor for security. They descended to sublevel 4, entering a pristine, heavily shielded chamber dominated by a circular dais. Resting in crystal cradles on the dais were 6 cylindrical, crystalline devices, 0-point modules. They were dark, devoid of the inner, golden glow of a charged unit. They're dormant, Tripp noted, kneeling beside the dais. The containment fields are built, but they haven't been primed. The priming sequence requires a mathematically perfect energy injection to tear a microhole in subspace and cap it instantly, McKay explained, his hands hovering over the control pedestal. The Lantean computers can handle the math, but the energy relays are heavily degraded. If the power fluctuates by even a fraction of a percent during the injection, we don't get a ZPM, we get a localized black hole. Geordi stepped up, pulling an isolinear optical chip from his pocket and a Starfleet plasma spanner. Then we don't rely on the degraded relays. Trip, help me bypass the primary power feed. We'll use the phase rifle's power cells to create a localized, stabilized energy buffer. I can use my visor to monitor the subatomic containment field in real time. If I see a fluctuation, I'll cut the feed manually. You want to jumpstart a pocket universe using a flashlight battery and a pair of sunglasses? McKay asked, horrified. I've realigned a warp core with less, Dr. McKay, Geordi said calmly. Trip rigged the buffer. For the next hour, the room was a tense, silent workshop. Trip expertly spliced the Starfleet power cells into the Lantean crystal matrix, creating a highly stable, albeit small, energy reservoir. Geordi stared intently at the dormant ZPMs, his visor seeing down to the molecular bonds of the containment field. Buffer is stable, Trip whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. Ready on your mark, Rodney. McKay swallowed hard, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed the initiation sequence. Executing vacuum injection now. The room hummed with a bone-rattling frequency. Inside the crystal cylinders, a pinpoint of absolute blackness appeared, a tear in reality. Geordi's eyes widened behind his visor. Containment field is fluctuating, adjusting buffer flow. Holding. The vacuum energy is flooding in, capping the tear now. McKay slammed his hand down on the console. The black pinpoints vanished, instantly replaced by a blinding, brilliant golden light that illuminated the entire chamber. The 6 ZPMs pulsed with infinite, contained energy. They had done it. They had successfully forged and charged a batch of 0-point modules. I need a drink, Trip breathed, sitting back on his heels. We need to get these back to Atlantis, Shepard said over the comms, having monitored the entire terrifying process. Pack them up in shielded cases. An hour later, the strike team was assembled back in the gate room. The facility was fully powered, the air was clean, and the automated drone forges were quietly standing by for future orders. They had secured the 6 ZPMs in heavy Lantean shock cases. Hera, do you read me? Shepard called into his radio. Loud and clear, Major, Hera replied. I'm reading the power signature of the Stargate. Are you coming out? We're coming home, but we're leaving a present behind. We found a way to test the hangar doors. I'm sending you the coordinates of the phase shift zone on the moon's surface. Fly the Ghost directly at the rock face. There was a long pause on the radio. Major, you want me to fly my ship into a solid asteroid? Trust me, Shepard said. Rodney is engaging the phase generator now. Deep within the moon, a massive machine hummed to life. On the surface, a section of the jagged rock spanning 200 meters suddenly shimmered, losing its visual density, appearing like a mirage in the vacuum of space. Aboard the Ghost, Hera Syndulla swallowed her apprehension. She gripped the yoke, engaged the sublight engines, and drove the freighter straight at the moon. Sabine Wren braced herself in the co-pilot seat. Instead of a catastrophic impact, the ship simply slipped through the rock. The visual was surreal. The gray stone washed over the cockpit canopy like smoke before they emerged into a massive, brilliantly lit, cavernous hangar bay inside the moon. By the Force, Hera breathed over the comms. I'm inside, touching down now. All right, here is the play, Shepard announced to the team. Captain Archer, you and Major Hayes leave a squad of MACOs here to garrison the base. Anakin, leave a detachment of the 501st to back them up. Atlantis will start sending specialized personnel, scientists, and engineers through the gate tomorrow to take over the facility and start manufacturing drones. The rest of us are taking these ZPMs and going home. We have ships to upgrade." The return trip to Atlantis was triumphant. The discovery of the outpost changed the strategic landscape of the Pegasus galaxy, but the immediate tactical advantage was held in the 6 glowing crystals they brought back. In the subterranean jumper bays of Atlantis, the fleet engineers went to work. The integration of Lantean zero-point energy into multiversal technology was a monumental task, but the foundation had already been laid by their previous cross-faction collaborations. Major Shepard carried a ZPM personally to the submerged Yamato. Captain Kodai and Chief Engineer Sanada received it with deep reverence. Sanada, working directly with Mackay via the tactical link, integrated the ZPM into the Yamato's wave motion engine. The module didn't replace the engine. It acted as a massive, infinite capacitor. "Wave motion resonance is up by 400%, Sanada reported, his hands trembling as he read the dials. "The tachyon shielding is now practically impenetrable, and the charge time for the main shock cannons has been reduced to 0. We can fire continuously." Aboard the Resolute, Geordi LaForge and Trip Tucker assisted the Republic engineers in wiring a ZPM directly into the Venator's hypermatter reactor matrix. The massive wedge-shaped warship shuddered as the Lantean energy flooded its systems. The Republic deflector shields, already formidable, thickened into an absolute wall of energy. The sublight engines burned with a new, blinding intensity, granting the massive carrier a level of speed and maneuverability that defied its bulk. It was no longer just a carrier. It was an invincible dreadnought. Finally, Hera Syndulla, Kanan Jarrus, and Sabine Wren stood in the engine room of the Ghost. Mackay had personally supervised the installation of a ZPM into the Corellian freighter's modified power grid. Hera ran her hands over the console, feeling the incredible, thrumming vibration of the ship. The metaphasic shields provided by Starfleet were now backed by the infinite power of a ZPM. The Lantean cloaking device could be maintained indefinitely without draining the hyperdrive. The ship's sublight speed was off the charts. "She's not just a ghost anymore," Sabine noted, looking at the glowing power readouts. "She's a poltergeist." "With this kind of power, speed, and stealth," Hera said, a fierce, determined smile breaking across her face, "we can scout the entire Wraith supply network in a fraction of the time. We can find allies, map their culling routes, and never even be a blip on their radar. We own the shadows now." As the main scouting force returned to their posts in Atlantis, a small, heavily armed garrison of MACOs and clone troopers settled into the silent, ancient halls of the hidden moon base. The multiversal coalition had arrived in the Pegasus galaxy as desperate, stranded survivors. But with the discovery of the ZPM Forge and the monumental upgrades to their fleet, they were no longer simply surviving. They were preparing to go on the offensive. Part 6, Echoes of the Past. The 4 days following the successful raid on the Hollow Moon outpost had transformed Atlantis from a desperate stronghold into a fortress of unparalleled power. The integration of the newly forged zero-point modules into the city's ancient power grid had bathed the Lantean corridors in a warm, unbroken golden light. For the first time since the expedition's arrival, the city's massive stardrive engines were gently humming in a pre-ignition standby state, and the primary deflector shield was raised to its maximum threshold, rendering the city completely invisible and heavily armored against any orbital threat. In the subterranean jumper bays and the deepwater staging grounds, the multiversal fleet was experiencing a similar renaissance. The Yamato and the Resolute, their reactors now supercharged by Lantean ZPMs, were running continuous diagnostic drills. The ambient energy in the air was palpable, a crackling static of infinite potential that left Dr. Rodney Mackay in a perpetual state of frantic, caffeinated euphoria. But the tranquility of their hidden sanctuary was shattered on the morning of the 5th day. In the central command tower, The Lantean proximity sensors erupted into a cacophony of shrill, echoing alarms. The holographic projection table in the center of the room automatically flared to life, shifting from a localized map of the Lantean Ocean to a terrifyingly chaotic display of the upper atmosphere. "Report," Dr. Elizabeth Weir demanded, rushing out of her office and down the stairs to the main console, where McKay and Commander Data were already a blur of motion. "Massive spatial displacement in the upper thermosphere," McKay shouted over the alarms, his fingers flying across the crystal interface. "We're reading a massive spike in chronoton particles, graviton shear, and— Wait, this can't be right. It's two distinct subspace ruptures, simultaneous but completely different quantum signatures." "Are the Wraith tracking us?" Major John Shepard asked, jogging into the room with his P-90 already slung over his shoulder. "Negative, Major," Data replied calmly, his golden eyes reflecting the chaotic blue light of the hologram. "These are not hyperspace windows. They possess the identical anomalous decay rate as the spatial and temporal rifts that brought our respective vessels to this universe. We are receiving new arrivals." Above the planet Lantia, the bruised purple and black sky tore open in two distinct locations. From the first rupture, a swirling vortex of emerald and cerulean energy, a tiny, sleek vessel was violently expelled. It tumbled end over end, its sublight engine sputtering. It was a masterpiece of aeronautical design, plated in highly reflective chromium that mirrored the turbulent clouds around it. It was a Naboo H-2 executive shuttle, a vessel designed for diplomatic elegance rather than the brutal realities of an uncharted galaxy. 300 kilometers to the east, the second rupture violently tore space apart with a deafening, silent shockwave of pure white light. From this tier emerged a behemoth. It was an Excelsior-class heavy cruiser, a design instantly recognizable to any Starfleet officer. But as the visual telemetry fed into the Atlantis command center, the collective blood of the Starfleet personnel ran cold. The ship's hull was not the pristine white and gray of the United Federation of Planets. It was scarred, heavily armored, and painted with aggressive, dark yellow streaks. Emblazoned across its primary saucer section was a massive emblem, a sword piercing the earth. "My God," Captain Jean-Luc Picard whispered, stepping up to the console alongside a suddenly tense Captain Kirk. "That is not a Federation starship." "It's the ISS Excelsior," Kirk said, his voice hard, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the terrifying insignia of the Terran Empire. "The Mirror Universe. Elizabeth raised the city's shields to maximum. If the Terran Empire has crossed over into the Pegasus Galaxy, the Wraith will be the least of our problems." "Wait," Commander Geordi LaForge interrupted, adjusting his visor as he analyzed the incoming data streams. "I'm detecting a subspace transmission from the Excelsior. They're broadcasting on the open frequencies, but they're embedding a secondary, highly encrypted digital handshake within the carrier wave." Geordi routed the signal through the Atlantis mainframe. "They are pinging the tactical data link. It's a polyalphabetic cipher utilizing prime timeline Starfleet encryption protocols. A Terran Empire ship wouldn't have those codes." "Put them on speaker," Weir ordered. The audio channel crackled to life, filled with the static of the upper atmosphere. "This is Captain Hikaru Sulu of the— Well, the hull says ISS Excelsior, but I assure you we are prime timeline Starfleet. We are reading multiple Starfleet and unknown heavy cruiser signatures cloaked in your ocean.